21 days after the New Mexico dress rehearsal, a lone B-29 was over Hiroshima carrying an atomic bomb. At 8:15 in the morning of August 6, Japanese time, the first atomic bomb hit an enemy target. The bomb was aimed to explode above 0 point, a spot in the city at the junction of the Motoyisu and Ota rivers. The bomb was intentionally set to explode well above the 0 point to dissipate its radioactivity. Here is the pictorial record of the result. At 0 point, directly beneath the explosion, the soldier in the scene is pointing at the spot from which all damage to the surrounding area was measured in terms of distance from the center of the blast. Within a mile of 0 point, the devastation speaks for itself. But in these very ruins, Army cameramen have found and filmed pictorial evidence that tells in twisted steel and stone the effect of death-dealing atomic power. Reinforced concrete buildings seem to have withstood the explosion fairly well, the damage varying with their distance from 0 point. Within an area of a mile to a mile and a half, this type of building was the only type to withstand complete demolition and destruction. The destructive circle within a mile from 0 point had a few notable exceptions, mainly reinforced concrete. On the edge of the area of greatest damage was a landmark, the Red Cross Hospital, which never ceased functioning although it sustained damage. Today it dominates the desert of a debris that was Hiroshima. Another notable exception to the general demolition was the Higaski Railroad Station in East Hiroshima, a mile and a half from the center of the blast. This building, however, suffered extensive damage. The twisted steel beams and concrete wall show the effects of the tremendous concussion. What's left of the Commercial Museum, within 2/10 of a mile of 0 point, also gives indication of the tremendous push of the explosion. Amazingly enough, bridges did not suffer too badly at Hiroshima. This steel rail bridge 1 mile from 0 point had the side toward the explosion virtually blasted by flying particles, which removed almost all the paint. But the side away from the explosion did not need a new paint job. Roads in the area fared better than buildings or bridges. Shortly after the fires died down, traffic was resumed. Today, these highways through the ruins are again in use. Beside our military traffic trudge the survivors of vanished Hiroshima, the first city in history to be atom-bombed into oblivion.
Do nuclear bombs exist? Your immediate answer is yes. But how do you know? During the mid-20th century, television and movie watchers were bombarded with imagery of what was purported to be atomic test footage. But what were they really watching? They couldn't rewind a videotape or rescan through a video on their computer. So what option did they have but to accept these images at their face value? Now we have opportunity to scrutinize these images to see if they hold up to analysis. Take a look at these trees. Now what was that? And who turned the camera? They're in awfully straight lines, aren't they? Now this must be a different blast because it's coming from a different direction. Wait, now they've put it back. But those are the same trees we saw in the first clip, aren't they? And now this. First they showed us these trees that they panned left on. Then they show us these trees that look like they should be next to a model train. Notice how straight the rows are. It looks artificial to me. Then they show us these trees again. Where's the forward camera? And then back to these trees again. And then they show us what looks to be a real forest that's been chopped down or torn down. Now take a look at this. It's footage of the first H-bomb test called Ivy Mike. Watch how it changes. That's a composite. Then it morphs into this. It looks like a completely separate explosion. Now take a look at the frame before the explosion and then the one after. These frames were cut together. Why? Then this frame was cut to this, which looks like the sun to me. It looks like they're zooming in on the sun. Maybe a composite because the clouds aren't moving. Then they introduced some sort of liquid. It looks like a laboratory concoction in composite with the sun. Next is Operation Dominic Fireballs in the Yukon. What does that look like to you? Watch it again. It's the sun. Now here's Operation Greenhouse. These guys are getting all ready to see what looks to be the sun again. The sun seems to start to expand. Maybe it's being zoomed in on. They worship the sun after all, Lucifer. So why wouldn't they use him as their greatest weapon? And who headed up the whole program? None other than J. Robert Oppenheimer of the Oppenheimer family, who is reputed to have been the original financiers who got the Rothschilds started in Frankfurt, Germany in the 18th century.
He should do his duty, and to impress him, takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
You're thinking, what about Hiroshima? Is that Hiroshima? Is that Hiroshima? That looks like Hiroshima, but it looks like it's been carpet bombed. Check out this image of Rotterdam. Was that a nuclear bomb? Now compare it to this image of Hiroshima. Actually, this isn't Hiroshima, it's Tokyo after firebombing in 1945. If you accept that FDR might have had foreknowledge of the bombing at Pearl Harbor, maybe you might want to leave room for the possibility that his propaganda machine might have created the myth of atomic bombs. There's no question that the powers that be have ballistics with tremendous explosive capacity. But this shot, for example, could easily be high-volume dynamite. And what are we looking at here? Take a look at this house again. Whatever was strong enough to blow it to smithereens wasn't strong enough to even shake the camera. And look how high up the camera position is. Are we looking at another model? Now look at this bus and this car. Whatever's blowing them up is not moving the camera. And this building seems to blow up from the inside. Everything gets blown every which way except for the camera. Except look in this shot, it seems to tilt up a little bit. Now this is one of my favorites. Watch the two guys behind the glass. Who's filming them? Isn't he being exposed to all that rocket fuel? Anyways, I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. If you're hell-bent on believing that they can blow up the world at the push of a button, then go ahead. But next time you hear a politician justifying the invasion of a country based on the fact that they supposedly have weapons of mass destruction, realize that they're not only lying about the other country supposedly possessing weapons of mass destruction, they also may be lying about the very existence of weapons of mass destruction. And why don't they call them nuclear bombs anymore?
What's happening?
Okay, I just want to ask you a simple question, without commenting on whether it's true or not. Have you heard the idea that nuclear weapons are a fraud or a hoax and never existed?
No.
None of you heard that?
No.
Okay.
They've got...
Do you mind if I ask you an intellectual question?
What's that?
Without commenting on the truth or otherwise, have you heard the idea that nuclear weapons are a hoax or a fraud? You haven't?
No.
Sure. Without commenting on the truth or otherwise, have you heard the idea that nuclear weapons are a fraud or a hoax?
To set a naval trap,
What?
you need
Universally?
Yeah, the nukes are a fake.
Well,
in London, and the noise you
I know for an absolute fact that they're not a fraud.
changing of the guard,
What's your evidence?
looking over at St.
I
James's Park,
served
with Downing Street
in the Royal Air Force on Maralinga Range in Australia.
You were at
I
Maralinga.
worked with nuclear
Because it was in
weapons as
that
well.
building, in an obscure
Did you actually?
40,
I've heard about Maralinga and seen the report on it.
Yeah,
to actually
I was there for the last
Room 40
hydrogen bomb
is where
test
naval
in
wireless
1963.
intelligence
What did you actually see?
There were two
I was
breakthroughs
out
in the First
running,
World War. First,
and I was a cross-country runner,
traffic flows,
and I was running out in the bush, and I knew that there was a test imminent, and I was running along this road, and suddenly I felt some, it was a hot day, but I felt some additional heat on the, I'd only got the shorts on my legs and my back, and
You saw some heat. Did you see any light?
yeah, I turned around, I didn't see the flash, but I felt the blast,
And room 40
and I was 40 miles away.
For our most modern signals intelligence.
Does that answer your question?
including Bletchley Park,
It's an interesting
World War,
comment,
and the government.
but it doesn't answer the question. No.
Who are you asking it for?
I'm not asking for anybody else. I've got a website on the subject. And,
Oh,
And
right.
as a result, the Admiralty made
But
much less.
there
Okay.
aren't many of us left.
You, without a comment on whether it's true or not, have you heard the idea that nuclear weapons are a fraud?
No, I have not.
You haven't? You sure about that?
Well, depends on where
Okay,
you're on.
I just wondered, because most people haven't.
Okay.
So you're in the great majority.
All right.
Without commenting on if it's true or not, have you heard the idea that nuclear weapons are a fraud or hoax?
I haven't heard a thing.
Okay,
at
I just
all
wonder,
about
most people haven't.
No, I haven't heard a thing about that at all. I must admit.
Do you think they exist?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm still bound by the Official Secrets Act.
Are you saying you were at
I worked.
Maralinga?
No. I'm sorry. I didn't realise you were filming, and I thought it was just a general.
Well, I've heard it's just my...
I thought it was just a general question.
Oh, it is a general question, yeah.
But I worked. I was in the Royal Air Force, and I worked with nuclear weapons
How do you know you worked with nuclear weapons?
because
No, seriously, it's a serious question. How do you know they were nuclear weapons?
I can tell you there were nuclear weapons.
How do you know?
Because of the training I received.
That's not really answering the question. You might have been...
Well, I can only tell you so much. As I
Okay.
say, I'm still bound by the Official Secrets Act.
Or not. Have you heard the idea that nuclear weapons are a fraud?
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
Fantastic. How much credence do you give to that?
Not a lot.
Oh, well, how come you've heard of it?
I was only reading about it the other day, actually. In fact, it's in Time magazine this week.
Time magazine? Not internet.
No, it's probably on internet as it's in Time, but Time magazine certainly.
And they mentioned it without believing it, because they mentioned it as a...
Come down either side.
Oh, thank you. That's interesting.
All right. Here's your Methodist answer for you.
Okay. Okay, without commenting on whether it's true or not, have you heard the idea that nuclear weapons are a hoax or a fraud and never existed? You haven't heard that?
No,
Absolutely sure?
I'm absolutely certain.
Okay, thank you.
Well, of all topics that have importance in understanding the spellcraft, the hoaxcraft that the powers that be have implemented on the public, there is none really as big as the nuke. The nuke idea that somebody can push a button in Washington and within minutes or hours at the minimum, you'll be blown to bits. Absolutely blown to bits, just at the whim of the president with the black suitcase, or Vladimir Putin, or even better still, some terrorist with a suitcase bomb, as we've seen this whole nuclear thing develop over the years, and then down to the idea they put it in weapons, depleted uranium, dirty bombs, i.e. terrorism. But we've never seen any of this other than Hiroshima, other than these little fake explosions that they show us over the years, with houses getting blown away, but the camera never does. Yes, we see a major fail in the View Club here too, so another challenge to the View Club. How about this one? You see all hoaxes in Hollywood and Boston and Sandy Hook, but not the nuke one, because too many of them run with the nuke fear, with Armageddon ideas of nuclear destruction. Just such a popular idea for so many channels. For them to cover the nuke hoax is just not going to be in their remit for many reasons. Look at the shape of the thing in there now. Look at this head looking at you. It's like a bird. Look, tweeting at you. All of this computer generated stuff, and in their day they used other methods, of course, artistic methods on film, but they always used embedding. You see that 9/11, devil's heads. We saw that in the Ukraine at the Maiden event. It's just been so many times. Look at that there now. It's straight out of Beatrice Potter or something. It looks like a rabbit nearly. And here we go. Every one of these things is always different. Look, turned into a skull head at the end. And they morph. They're big on this, I'm telling you. People laugh, but that's just how it is. Look at this one here. This has no ground-based contact. They must have exploded in the air, did they? It's just amazing more people haven't looked at this. Really, you know, the whole thing about it. Look at this one here. They're always looking so different. That looks like a big tree. It sort of matches this here, doesn't it? Just watch a bit of it. Oh, very slow, this one. Very slow indeed. No one's moving at all. Very strange, isn't it? Must just be a still. Oh, look at this. Here we go. Straight out of Fukushima style things we've seen and war movies. Look, that's a little model. You can clearly see that. You know, the special effects from Hollywood. Special effects from Hollywood, but it's enough to con all the public. But in this day and age, you think people would analyse this better. You just have to look for a minute and you can see just what you saw there. A little model getting eaten by water somehow in a big tank. It's hard to know exactly how they've produced that. Is that all solid or is that a lot of steam? It could be too for that one. Look at this flash here. Here's the flash and the ring, the great ring. You know that one, the ring of Saturn. Look, there it is. Some of my followers will love that. There it is. There's your Saturn, always present. The big glow. See, that ring evaporated quickly, didn't it? Look, this is glowing on forever, not expanding at all. It's just all here. It's a pyrotechnic device of some sort, but I think it's just done in mini scale. It could be done various ways. I'm thinking a lamp behind a few sheets of paper, you know, with cutouts, etc., you know. Especially when it comes to Britain. Britain's marvellous at this stuff. You just got to look at their old movies, their old war movies, etc. They're fantastic. There's plenty of documentaries you can watch on how these things work. Now here's one I found very interesting, a sort of smaller looks like a privateer, but he's definitely in the system because he's talking code each time. You just got to hear it, the 6, and then the 6, and then the 13.
Contains about 60 kilograms of uranium-235, of which only about 600 grams underwent fission. Enough, though, to generate an explosion equal to more than 13 kilotons of TNT. The bomb's designers divided the amount needed into 2 pieces. At the tip, they placed about 40% of the necessary uranium. They loaded the remaining 60% at the other end. A conventional explosion drove the projectile into the target, initiating the nuclear explosion. Now, the exact details of this bomb remain classified because they could still be used. Although this design involves some brilliant innovation by engineers in the 20th century, the really difficult part is preparing the uranium. This lies at the heart of all efforts to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. The key problem? Separating 2 nearly identical variants of the element uranium. Natural uranium occurs as a metal ore, and it contains primarily 2 isotopes. Most uranium is U-2.
Now, this is an important part of the whole thing here. How they said originally that they had to turn it into this, and it was a very expensive idea, they said. Then as they needed to enhance the arsenal, they said they could suddenly use this one. And that in itself just shows the sort of chicanery and the levels of things that they get into here. First of all, they had to make it unique, and they needed big fundage for one sort of operation, as it were. But then they had to make it so that, well, Pakistan can have them, and China, etc. I mean, it's not that expensive anymore because we worked out how to do it this way. And then they, of course, can use that to fear people around, like India versus Pakistan, and you've got China versus Japan ideas. You've got North Korea. You've got all these ideas that have been brewed from this of countries that are likely to blow you up with a nuclear bomb. And I'll do more on this, the actual working of it, but I just showed you then the basic idea in case people didn't know. Shooting one pile of uranium into another. I seriously doubt, I have doubts even about the existence of so-called uranium as far as we know. Have you ever seen any? Of course somebody will jump on here and say, oh yes, they worked and saw it. I had a guy communicating with me here a while ago that said his father had worked in the industry, and his own father said to him, look, there's something wrong here. Very compartmentalized indeed, that's the way I'll put it to you. Anyway, stay tuned for more videos on this subject.
Once you start a lie, you've got to build on the lie, and the lie starts getting bigger. In fact, exponentially bigger, bigger and bigger. And you can never tell the truth because then you've exposed the lie that you've been telling for years. But why do you want to expose a great lie that makes a lot of money? Now, observing these 2 explosions, these 2 different nuclear tests, one thing's very obvious. There's certainly a huge colour shift. One is red, one is yellow. So they had different metals in the explosion to create the different colours. Now, I would think that they would all be relatively the same. Certainly the one on the left really just doesn't look right. But in fact, these mushroom clouds aren't right. Because look, there's no explosion really much on the ground if you look at the one on the right and left really. You get a clearer vision of ground level, of course, on the right. See, it's all sort of a puff of smoke in the air if you really examine it. And even if these are fair dinkum pictures, which is probably debatable in itself, but let's just take that they are real depictions of explosions, they're not that big, are they? It's just a puff of smoke in the air. It's some sort of like firework device, it looks more to me. There's not a big explosion on the ground outwards. It's just this big cloud because that's what people have come to expect. That's what looks effective and has a certain scare factor. Now, this is taking mushroom clouds to another level. This is the freestanding mushroom cloud. Now this is amongst nuclear explosion shots. You see, I don't think people have ever really looked at these explosions against other explosions, all the different explosions in the different countries. And certainly if you go to any of the Chinese stuff, well, you're going to see something telling there, just like you see with Jade Rabbit. It's not quite the quality, because in China they can sell it easier. A few loud bangs and everybody gets excited and goes, oh, wow, wow. It's a little bit more discernment in the West. People want a little bit more spectacular and real convincing looking imagery. But I mean, the floating mushroom cloud here is way strange. Why the gap there? Is this Photoshop? Is this reality? It looks very, very peculiar. And if this was the only image that was peculiar, but every image you can drag up and you can go through yourself and look under image search and you'll start to see, just like 9/11, so many different smokes, so many different looks. It just doesn't look right. But if all that variance in the look of the explosion and the fake look of those two that I showed you in the beginning there doesn't convince you that this nuclear weapons industry is nothing more than a drain for money on the public strings and a method of control and fear, here's the aftermath of the explosion at Bikini Atoll. Now, what was glaringly obvious to me straight away is how come one area is just so green and this area here is just so burnt? People say, oh, it's just the angle and the dangle. Well, I can see this has been flame thrown. That's really what it looks like. And not only that, those trees have been cut with a chainsaw or an axe. Look at the angles on the trees. It's how you cut them so they fall. And you drag them away. They're not snapped by any explosion. That's absolutely balderdash. If they were snapped, they'd be ripped and teared and there'd be bits of bark teared. I've worked on trees most of my life. I know a lot about clearing trees and what ground looks like. And we get bushfires here and people go and cut some of the trees and that stumpy look there looks exactly like what I've seen many, many times. It certainly doesn't look like a nuclear blast in respect to those palm trees and other trees over in the yonder, in the distance as it were. They're just perfectly sitting there. This is supposed to be pretty recent after the blast if it's all cindered like this. In this tropical world, it only takes a matter of weeks and there's little tips and things and everything carpets up pretty green pretty quick. So this is within a week or two at the most of the so-called blast. And we have perfect green vegetation and chainsaw cut trees and just a flamethrower cindered look. In a fairly small area too, I might add, but enough to convince the unknowing public of the 50s and 60s. And they already had them in duck and cover mode. So, I mean, a little bit of Bikini Atoll, and there's that old little sex card they throw in, a bit of bikini. And that was aptly chosen, no doubt in my mind whatsoever. So there you go, you see. You'll have to stay tuned for my next video where we'll really get into a little bit of the science of it all. But I just wanted to show the basic things here of why it's so wrong. That is balderdash. That has been cut with a chainsaw. Now you see, when you've got one really big hoax going like this, you've got to add the old shooters in the woods. There's nothing like a few little conflicting stories, stories of heroism, stories which build dialectic and stories which give what you're doing credibility. Fear factory #1. And it's like a monkey on everyone's shoulder. Isn't it good when you can see they can't push a button and destroy the world in seconds like they say?
You know what it is about radioactivity that makes people crazy? It's invisible. You can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't smell it, but it can get you anyway. In this sense, it is the boogeyman. Further, almost no one knows anything about radiation, and so quite understandably, people fill in those blanks of what you don't know can kill you by playing it safe and overestimating the hazard from the radiation. And this already distorted image of the hazards of radioactivity is fanned by the paranoid ramblings of crazies, and especially of the paranoia merchants trying to whip up this fear to make people really scared such that they can capitalize on that fear.
Fluoride Shield, Survival Shield, and all the products at InfoWarsLife.com grew out of my quest to try to find the very best compounds from God's cornucopia to protect myself and my family. And from our research, I believe we are bringing you the best, highest quality products. And you have that commitment from Alex Jones and the entire InfoWars crew.
Wow, a personal promise from Alex Jones based on the best research from both him and the entire InfoWars crew. And of course, the small print just reinforces how much confidence they have in their research claims. Right? Actually, no. This statement has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
And from our research, I believe we are bringing you the best, highest quality products. And you have that commitment from Alex Jones and the entire InfoWars crew.
Meanwhile, let's take a look at the worst disaster in nuclear history, Chernobyl. As you can see from space, the radiation level is so high that there is no plant life for hundreds of miles around the reactor. Well, actually, no. Indeed, it turns out that the radiation levels recorded directly outside the plant where this disaster happened can be so low that they are comparable to those that you would get cruising on a commercial jet, and the latter measurement I can personally vouch for as I measured it myself. And for many folks, their principal fear of nuclear power is that this is going to happen, even though this is absolutely impossible. More on that later. But the paranoia merchants still feast on people's insecurity about radiation, and this can lead to really quite crazy folks getting quite large audiences.
I average around 600 people on a stream. All of these people show up on my stream each night is amazing. It truly is, because they're not here to play games. They're not here for nonsense.
And they will tell their audiences the most stupid things ever.
California is a wasteland, period. How can it not be a wasteland when you had MOX fuel, the number 3 reactor, is 2 million times worse. That went straight up into the jet stream at 100 miles per hour.
Well, actually, no. California is not a wasteland. Well, not a radioactive wasteland anyway. But he's not done telling people things that are diametrically orthogonal to reality with that steely-eyed absolute certainty that can only come with years of marinating one's brain in paranoia juice.
Saying iodine-131 only has a half-life of 8 days is the craziest thing you can imagine coming out of somebody who's supposed to have an education and supposed to have some morals and ethics.
Well, actually, in reality, there is kind of this scientific consensus on the half-life of iodine-131. And yeah, it does actually look like a pretty good 8 days to me. But he's just getting warmed up. What you're about to witness is simply the most stupid statement ever made about radioactivity.
I'm arming you with knowledge that's invaluable. I've researched this all extensively over many years now. In order to really wrap your mind around all of that, I think that Dixie cup says it all. A Dixie cup full of this yellow cake from that 40-mile pit. You put that in a restaurant, you'll kill everybody there within an hour for the next 4 billion years. Like I said earlier, just keep filling that restaurant up. If I had a cup of 238 here, I would die before I finished that sentence. I can put that cup of 238 in a restaurant, it'll kill everybody in the restaurant inside of an hour. Even if they just walked in and left, they would die an hour later. And that would go on for 4.5 billion years times 10, because of the way it decays, right?
Well, let's start with the bloody obvious stuff. Where do you think this uranium all comes from? You dig it out of the ground, where it's been for almost the entire history of the Earth. Indeed, it's a significant reason why the middle of the Earth is still so hot.
So if you have a little speck of uranium-238, you're supposed to dig up 6 inches of topsoil, 900 feet around it, and put a fence around it with universal signs on it.
So yeah, according to this guy, almost the entire of America should be classified as a radioactive wasteland. Admittedly, when the Earth formed some 4.5 billion years ago, there was about twice as much radiation from uranium as there is now, but somehow life still managed to muddle through. Well, anyway, scroll the clock forward about 4.5 billion years. Man comes along and digs this radioactive shit out of the ground and finds something useful to do with it. Initially, it's refined as yellow cake. Guess what colour that is? It was initially produced in huge quantities when it was mined in an effort to get radium, which is basically radioactive stuff that glows in the dark. Stuff that makes this clock radioactive.
I actually leave it there, and what you'll find is it'll bury the needle.
However, there really weren't that many uses for this element uranium. But curiously, while refining tons of this material that they dug out of the ground, they made the stunning observation that almost everyone who merely touched this yellow cake didn't die instantly.
If I had a cup of 238 here, I would die before I finished that sentence.
If they had, they might have been able to think of some military use for this instant yellow death powder in World War II. Further, I've actually got to confess, I've actually handled yellow cake. This is this uranium oxide in exactly the fashion stated here.
That is uranium nitrate. There you go. Very yellow.
A Dixie cup full of this yellow cake from that 40-mile pit. You put that in a restaurant, you'll kill everybody there within an hour. If I had a cup of 238 here,
uranium nitrate,
I would die before I finished that sentence. I've been studying uranium-238 because of wars for almost 8 years straight. I've been studying uranium-238 because of wars for almost 8 years straight.
Maybe this instant death has a bit of a delay on it, because I've completed a little more than one sentence before dying. Indeed, it's now over 10 years since I handled this uranium oxide like this, and I'm still not instantly dead. See, it turns out that this yellow powder that didn't cause instant death was kind of colourful, and so they started using this chemical in glazes for plates and the such like. You see, while uranium is actually radioactive, it's a weak alpha emitter. Alphas have lousy penetrating power, which means you can handle things like this with gloves with essentially no ill effects. What I mean by uranium is a weak alpha emitter per nucleus is it doesn't give off much radiation that quickly, that it's got a half-life of about 5 billion years. That means in the entire history of the Earth, only about half of the original uranium that was here has decayed. And now just compare that to the same amount of, say, iodine-131, which would release about the same amount of radiation in 8 days.
Yeah, so it's just another way to get us scared into giving them more money. So we're giving them hundreds of billions of dollars in this space race that America and Russia were doing, and they also did the Cold War, so they scared us into this nuclear scare and then stole a bunch more money to build fake nuclear weapons. And so yeah, the nuclear weapons don't exist as such. The tests that you've seen, the very early ones like you were talking about, are clearly fake, just done on models. Some of the later tests were done using stacked dynamite. You just get a shitload of dynamite and blow it all up, and it makes the mushroom cloud, does the whole thing. And what they'd do is they'd tell one team that, they'd have a bunch of people 20 miles away, say army guys watching, doing the test, and then you've got over on one island these people stacking dynamite, saying that we're doing this for comparative purposes, and the real nuke's going to be over on that island. Meanwhile, they got another team over on that island stacking dynamite for comparative purposes, and the real nuke's going to be on the other island. So they even have military men stacking dynamite that they know is being used for these supposed nuclear explosions, but they believe that they've seen a real nuke, even though they tell them to cover your eyes and put your head in your laps as it happens. You don't see anything until the smoke clears afterwards. But yeah, a lot of military men will swear, up and down that nukes must exist because they were there at some of those tests, and it's just dynamite. They do it beneath water by stacking dynamite in submarines, and you can do it up in the air as well. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki nukes, you can see that they're clearly two superimposed explosions, one on top of each other. There's two smoke plumes made to look like they're one. I actually used this technique several times. If you look at this nuke footage, there's if you go to my website, Nuclear Weapons Do Not Exist, you'll see these 3 documentaries that expose the thing completely. And so not only do so for instance, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, what happened is that they were firebombed. So the cities were leveled just like Tokyo was firebombed, and the damage is comparable. But they claim that it all happened from one blast. But this is clearly not true, because flowers and plants started growing within a month, and they say nuclear radiation would exist for hundreds, thousands of years and would cause birth defects and everything. But nowadays, Hiroshima's a bustling city. Everyone's living there. Everything's growing there. Radiation's not a problem. There is some radiation after any explosion, so you would be able to go there with a Geiger counter and get some radiation, especially right afterwards, but it dies down quite quickly. And nuclear power, one of the most prominent nuclear physicists in America, he's dead now, Galen Windsor. He was involved in setting up most of the nuclear power plants in America. And he went all over America for years giving this lecture about how nuclear power is just the most expensive and effective way to boil water. And they're essentially steam plants, and that's all it is. The nuclear component that supposedly causes all this radioactive waste that needs to be, hazmat dealt with, and they drill holes into bedrock and put the nuclear waste deep under the earth, and they've got all these crazy regulations. He says, when we were first working with nuclear material, uranium, plutonium, we held it in our hands, and if some of it got hot, we'd throw it in the water, and that was it. No problem. He said, I would bathe, I would swim in the pool there that we would throw the radiated metals into, no problem. People thought he was crazy. He started drinking a glass of water from it every day, no problems. And then in his lecture, he started eating radioactive waste. So you can see on YouTube, type in Galen Windsor, and he'll take out a Geiger counter, show you some radioactive material. He'll take it out of a tube, and they'll say, I've just caused an EPA, if the EPA was in here, we'd have to clear out this whole area for half a mile, and people would have to come in with hazmat suits, blah, blah, and then he puts it back in the tube, and there's some left over on his hand. So then he licks his hand, shows the waste on his tongue, swallows it, and says, I've been doing this for years. And so the idea is just another fear campaign. And that's why they get the military involved in all these nuclear power plants and the nuclear weapons. It's to siphon off money, keep us afraid, and keep us playing off one another. Everybody thinks that, Russia and America are enemies, and that the Cold War is real and the space race is real. But it's all just, they're all like WWE. It's like Hulk Hogan and Macho Man. They're all paid by Vince McMahon. They all go out to eat together. If you're high up in politics anywhere, for sure you're part of this brotherhood that controls everything. There's no independent man at the head of any state. And if he was, what's he doing?
Chris here from Hoaxbusters Call. This piece of footage here is from the Atomic Filmmakers documentary. I'll put a link to it in the description. Let's just take a look at some of the footage that they used in this film. Let's take a look at this explosion here. I mean, does this look real to you? Let's freeze it here. It is not, that is not real. I mean, look at that. That's not real footage of an atomic bomb. That is Hollywood special effects. It's, you know, it's pretty good for its day, but I mean, come on, look at this. What I really wanted to examine was this piece of footage here. And let's watch this. Okay, the bomb goes off. Let's give this a little bit of a closer look, shall we? Something just ain't right here. Okay, the bomb goes off. Now check out this area right here. That white flash, that part of the explosion. Now let's keep an eye on that as I run this in slow motion here. Now watch this. Watch how it stays static as the rest of the explosion encloses around it. That's not possible. Watch it again here in slow motion. And reverse it. Look at that little blast in the corner. Look at that. It doesn't change. This is some kind of layering special effect. Some double exposure effect. Yeah, just look at that. I mean, just look at it. I mean, look at the... Also pay attention to the little puffy clouds right above this so-called mushroom cloud and how they're not even affected. You know, just rewatch it again and take note of that too. Just watch Atomic filmmakers. They admit that this footage came out of Lookout Mountain, which employed Hollywood producers and people in the industry to produce all this footage. They admit to it. I mean, they're going to tell you that they went out there and filmed it, but no, they created it. There's no doubt about it. You know, why else would you need Hollywood people? Just give it some thought. Thanks for watching. Take care.
In illuminated figures before the operator in the manual office, who then...
Days after the New Mexico dress rehearsal, a lone B-29 was over Hiroshima carrying an atomic bomb. At 8:15 in the morning of August 6, Japanese time, the first atomic bomb hit an enemy target. The bomb was aimed to explode above 0 point, a spot in the city at the junction of the Motoyisu and Ota rivers. The bomb was intentionally set to explode well above the 0 point to dissipate its radioactivity. Here is the pictorial record of the result. At 0 point, directly beneath the explosion, the soldier in the scene is pointing at the spot from which all damage to the surrounding area was measured in terms of distance from the center of the blast. Within a mile of 0 point, the devastation speaks for itself. But in these very ruins, Army cameramen have found and filmed pictorial evidence that tells in twisted steel and stone the effect of death-dealing atomic power. Reinforced concrete buildings seem to have withstood the explosion fairly well, the damage varying with their distance from 0 point. Within an area of a mile to a mile and a half, this type of building was the only type to withstand complete demolition and destruction. The destructive circle within a mile from 0 point had a few notable exceptions, mainly reinforced concrete. On the edge of the area of greatest damage was a landmark, the Red Cross Hospital, which never ceased functioning although it sustained damage. Today it dominates the desert of a debris that was Hiroshima. Another notable exception to the general demolition was the Higaski Railroad Station in East Hiroshima, a mile and a half from the center of the blast. This building, however, suffered extensive damage. The twisted steel beams and concrete wall show the effects of the tremendous concussion. What's left of the Commercial Museum, within 2/10 of a mile of 0 point, also gives indication of the tremendous push of the explosion. Amazingly enough, bridges did not suffer too badly at Hiroshima. This steel rail bridge 1 mile from 0 point had the side toward the explosion virtually blasted by flying particles, which removed almost all the paint.
Do nuclear bombs exist? Your immediate answer is yes. But how do you know? During the mid-20th century, television and movie watchers were bombarded with imagery of what was purported to be atomic test footage. But what were they really watching? They couldn't rewind a videotape or rescan through a video on their computer. So what option did they have but to accept these images at their face value? Now we have opportunity to scrutinize these images to see if they hold up to analysis.
But the side away from the explosion did not need a new paint job. Roads in the area fared better than buildings or bridges. Shortly after the fires died down, traffic was resumed. Today, these highways through the ruins are again in use. Beside our military traffic trudge the survivors of vanished Hiroshima, the first city in history to be atom-bombed into oblivion.